To go further in depth on what took place yesterday, we are pleased to bring in Elliott Abrams, a senior fellow for Middle East Studies on the Council on Foreign Relations, also a former Deputy National Security Advisor and advisor to President George W. Bush. Elliott, always great to talk to you. How you doing?
Good. How are you?
Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah. Let's get started here. We had this kind of strange internet outage in North Korea yesterday and then a cryptic message from Marie Harf. The thing that kind of struck me, though, this administration has not been reluctant to take credit for these types of things. And why would they not take credit for something like this?
I guess they're a little bit afraid that if they try to humiliate Kim Jong-un face to face, as it were, he'll do it again. That is, that he'll attack the United States again. I think it's just as well not to take credit for it, but I think it's important that we keep doing it and do more. I mean, I'd like to see us take down their internet again. And I think it's very important. I don't suppose he cares all that much about the internet, and very few North Koreans have it. But I'd go after his money. That's what really concerned them most during the Bush administration, when we went after their money and their banking system. And that's where I try to hit them again.
And out of all the options, and there are not very many of them, that really is, from what I can tell, the best one right now on the table. There are foreign banks that still do business with the North Koreans. What would it look like? Does that take an act of Congress? What can the president or Congress do to specifically hit those banks at this particular juncture?
You don't need anything from Congress. You just need the president telling Treasury, basically, do it. And start cutting them off from the international banking system. And you can start telling other banks around the world, no one who deals with North Korea can enter the U.S. banking system. You can make them, in a sense, a financial outlaw. We did that about 10 years ago, and it really hurt their economy. And boy, there's never been a better case for doing it than this one, where we've now identified them. And this is really very dangerous. I mean, it's not dangerous to take that one movie
right.
and hack Sony.
But we're talking about the First Amendment here, which is really what they affect, and that's why this stings for so many people. And, since it doesn't take an act of Congress to do this, why has the president not done this yet, at least in a public way?
Well, I think we've been a little bit soft on North Korea, frankly, and what's it gotten us? I mean, nothing. So I hope that we'll be a lot tougher on this kind of internet stuff, on their finances, and really start putting more pressure on. We know that being easy and soft in the hand of friendship and all that doesn't work with Kim Jong-un.
Yeah, well, we got about 2 minutes before we got to pause the conversation a bit. And I want to get to this study that was done there by the Center for Preventative Action at the Council on Foreign Relations. 2,200 foreign policies officials were surveyed, talking about what might be the most severe threats as we look ahead to 2015. And as I mentioned in the tease of the show, spoiler alert here, North Korea and cyber attacks are both on the list.
It's interesting because this is the first year that the internal threats to the United States are near the top of the list. Iraq is number one, as most likely to happen. But number two, a large-scale attack on the U.S. homeland or ally. That would be a terrorist attack. Number three, a cyber attack on U.S. critical infrastructure. Now, after this attack on Sony, I think we can begin to see there are probably a lot of corporations in the U.S. that do things more important than Sony. I mean, things like power plants,
right,
that can be attacked. So this is really dangerous. Usually you expect to see things like, the Middle East, Iraq, South China Sea, all of that. This is the first year that this survey of 2,200 people has come back and said, wait a minute, what's happening inside the U.S. may be at the top of the list.
Very concerning when you take a look at that. Another thing that I didn't see on the initial list we put out there, but I'm sure it's included on that. Putin's increasing desperation as the price of oil continues to fall. Some say oil at below $60 a barrel would really mean an end to the Putin regime. What's your take on that?
Yes, Ukraine is on the list, increased fighting in eastern Ukraine, and that obviously means Putin. I think we don't know yet. Putin could do one of two things. He can, in a sense, sue for peace and say, wait a minute, the economy's collapsing. Let me make a deal on Ukraine and let's everybody quiet down. Or does he double down? And that would mean, for example, attacking in Estonia the way he did in Ukraine and trying to scare us off. I think we don't really know yet whether he's going to do less or do twice as much.
All right, so we'll leave that part of the conversation aside, but we're going to have Elliott come back with us. We're going to continue talking a little bit more about what's taking place. Elliott Abrams from the Council on Foreign Relations. Thanks for sticking around. You're watching America's Forum right here on Newsmax TV. We're going to be here all day. Buckle up and get comfortable. More to come right after this short commercial break. With that backdrop, let's bring back in Elliott Abrams right now. And Elliott, thanks for being with us. And we know your specialty is foreign policy, national security, things of that nature. But in so many cases in the past couple of years, it's been local law enforcement that has really been on the front lines of keeping everybody safe. So many times they've stumbled upon something and said, this doesn't seem right. We know a lot of local police forces and sheriff's offices have ties with the FBI and counterterrorism folks, including the NYPD. So there is a new threat, maybe not new, but a newly intensified threat on these police officers. It's in a lot of their minds right now. How does this affect their ability to do their job? Because part of that job is looking out for things like domestic terrorism.
You're absolutely right, and particularly in New York. The New York Police Department is the best in the country in its intelligence division and in its counterterrorism activities. Morale is critical to that. And I think morale has just plummeted under Mayor de Blasio. I mean, he took a stance basically against the police department. That's how he ran for office. He's got a lot of ground to make up. You know, his protests over the last month or two have basically been anti-NYPD. And you saw how the officers reacted in turning their backs on him. The mayor seems to realize that now, and he's trying to make up for lost time. But he has a lot of ground to recover if he's going to get NYPD morale back to where it used to be under the previous mayors.
Yeah, well, let's listen to something that Mayor Bill de Blasio recently said, outspoken, as you mentioned, what you and other folks would call the anti-police rhetoric. He used yesterday's press conference as an opportunity to try and ease tensions. Let's take a listen to what he had to say.
The attack on them was an attack on all of us. It was an attack on our democracy. It was an attack on our values. It was an attack on every single New Yorker. And we have to see it as such.
Well, some might say too little, too late. Elliott, what was your take?
Well, it's the right thing to say, you know, and we all agree with that. And this was just a horrendous incident. But you can't take that position now and then change it and go back and forth and back and forth. The question is whether the mayor really stands behind the NYPD every day, 365 days a year. The answer was no. If this causes him to change his position, then that would be a positive outcome.
And you don't see any evidence of the mayor changing his position?
Well, he's saying the right thing now because the city is feeling so terrible over the tragedy of these two officers. Let's see where we are 3 months from now. Let's see where we are the next time, Al Sharpton comes to town and makes a protest. I think that's the critical thing. The mayor basically took sides with Sharpton against the NYPD. He's got to change that.
Now, of course, all this is also playing out, and we talked about the city of New York specifically, and that has been called out as one of the possible terror targets by transnational terrorist groups. What do you think right now, what else is going on inside the PD without revealing sources and methods? How do you think they are working with this backdrop trying to keep that city safe?
Well, the hard part, of course, is not going after in a sense, the conspiracies, particularly foreign ones, because they do that every day. I mean, that's the work of the intelligence division, the counterterrorism task forces that they have in New York. That's NYPD, FBI, CIA, and everyone else. The hard part is this new thing of the lone gunman. The lone gunman who may not have really done much planning and just goes out to kill. And there you just have to ask the public in part to be alert. That is, family members and neighbors who see something or hear something, that the caution to all of us, if you see something, say something. That doesn't just mean if you see someone you think is a foreign terrorist. It can be a neighbor. It can be someone who lives in your apartment house who's just gone off the deep end.
Yeah, and another reminder, again, to be vigilant. And you can really see where this issue transects or comes together, because you have an NYPD police officer now on the street. As many folks who've been in New York this time of year, they're out in force anyway. In the back of their mind, they're thinking about, is somebody going to walk up behind me now with these protests still going on? And we've seen video of protesters in the street calling for dead police, and now they're also having to be vigilant, looking out for these types of threats.
It just makes the job a great deal harder. And look, it's a terribly hard job anyway. And the one thing they had with mayors like Ed Koch and Rudy Giuliani and Michael Bloomberg was at least the knowledge that the mayor understood it completely and was behind them. And
Well,
they
we
need
got to
get
go,
this
Elliott,
passed.
and it does certainly seem a different administration for sure in New York City. Thanks so much for being
Yep.
with us. Happy holidays to you, sir.